My guests today on the Essential Coaching Skills podcast are Rachel Hott and Steve Leeds of the NLP Center of New York. This is a kind of rebroadcast of a conversation we had back in December of 2022 as part of the fundraiser for Jerry and Marilou Seavey. So here we go once again, Rachel Hott and Stephen Leeds. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Welcome, Steve and Rachel. Gosh, it's so good to see the two of you together so we can hear about the NLP Center of New York and what you guys do. How the heck did you guys get started in this? I know my story because I was a musician and I went through Tony Robbins and the Firewalk, and it sort of one thing led to another, but that's not your story. How did you guys get involved in NLP so long ago?
That was your 30-second elevator.
I was 15.
Yes,
We have two different stories, and then we met, right?
Oh, really?
So we have the story of I was just randomly working for a nonverbal communication researcher named Martha Davis. I was probably like 24, 25. Have recently graduated from my dance movement therapy master's program and was taking care of a bookshelf where there was Frogs into Princes.
No way. So you were a dance therapy major?
Yes, I had a master's in dance movement therapy.
Wow.
And I was helping organize her library, right? Trying to do something good in the world of being an intern. And I really opened that book because of its cover.
Ha!
That led me to my first NLP training. And now your story, and we can say how we all.
that's your story?
Well, that's what opened. I was doing the 1-minute elevators. That's what opened me to NLP. I was intrigued. Yeah.
And me, at the time, I was teaching mathematics at an alternative high school in Brooklyn.
Really?
And
Which one? Which high school?
it was called PM High School. PM because it was in the evening, and it allowed high school dropouts to go back to work and get their diploma in the evening.
Wow, interesting.
And yeah, it was in downtown Brooklyn in George Westinghouse High School. And basically, I was looking to change careers. I was enamored with personal development, taking things like EST in 1973, but I'll shorten my story, make it comparable to under a minute.
Too late. Too late.
And I was like when our daughter got married, she wanted to limit our speeches to a certain number of minutes, anyway, or seconds. And I studied with Jack Canfield, who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul books, and he recommended NLP.
Huh.
And so me and one of the students in the class picked up Structure of Magic and started reading it and having our own little study group. And then when I found out about NLP in the Manhattan, that's where we met. We both gravitated towards studying NLP in person, which was the only thing there was at the time. There was no internet.
So did you study with Annie Linden?
Yes.
Annie Linden and Frank Stoss, who's no longer alive, but that was our beginning team. But Stephen, he was ahead of me. He started, let's say, 1979.
Wow, 79? Wow. Wow. That's impressive.
In the couple life, I think I'm the historian, but then we get these little corrections. But in the memory is that he was in the office having just seen a client. He was already, been there for a couple of years. And I thought he looked like a nice guy, but probably already married. That was my assessment. So we just worked. I was what was I, like an office administrator. I think what I had done is I had called up Annie and I had said, what do you do for somebody who's on unemployment? Because at that time I just left American Management Association as a coder for management competency. And they let me come in and work, doing, what did we do in the old days? Copy things? I don't know.
Companies. Yeah, it
They,
was pre-computer. It was 79, I guess. So it's all filing and putting things in Rolodexes and
right, lots of longhand.
yeah.
So that's how we began, but we didn't
Wow.
begin at that moment. It wasn't until a couple months later when Steve started to flirt.
Yeah, we actually,
Ah.
my memory was going to a David Gordon seminar where Rachel and I were paired up in a group, and she told me a story, and it was a great metaphor, which we now use. But we got to meet each other, and then we met at a holiday party again, and that's the beginning of our romance.
Right. And I think you would like this story, Doug. And I
We'll
think
see. Let's go ahead. Give it a go.
uh,
I will let you know if it passes muster or not. But
give it to Steve to tell, and I'll add any edits.
Well, we never told it together. She told it to me. I've told it to class. I don't think we've ever done that together.
Well, we can start with Once Upon a Time.
There was a once upon a time. Actually, you know about this time. It was about King Arthur. More in so it was King Arthur, and he was wandering around the kingdom by himself, just kind of disguised as he wasn't obviously looking to do his kinging thing.
He was riding his horse through the woods.
Well, that's your story. My story, actually, he was on his horse, and a knight, a strange knight appeared out of nowhere and just spooked his horse, and he fell off, and the knight threatened to kill him. Right?
This is a good variation. I'm listening. I'm in the woods now, and it was a black horse in my mind, and I didn't know this variation. So go on.
Well, anyway, the gist of it is the knight threatened to kill him, but he said, "I'll spare your life if you can answer a question that I have, and I'll give you a week to answer the question." Right?
Probably a fortnight in the words of King Arthur.
okay. Either way, I think it's very generous to like, I'm going to kill you now to like, I'll give you a week. I think that's very generous.
Look, I'm a nice bad guy, and I'm a killer, but
Well, it takes some time to answer these heavy questions.
what, pray tell, was the question he needed to have answered?
That would be interesting if we could have you guess what the question was, but we'll tell.
No, the question is, what is it all women want?
Ah, no one knows that. That's a trick question.
Yeah. So he went to all the Knights of the Round Table, which of course were all men.
Oh yeah, that's
And-
a good source for this information.
And they all, when he asked the question, they looked at each other like, I don't know. So he says, well, you better find out because my life depends upon it. And, you work for me. You made a vow that you would fight for the right and fight for Camelot. So they all went out searching for the answer to the question.
Okay. So what happens is in my version, one night, like let's say Galahad, right? Just,
All right,
Okay.
yeah, let's say that it's Galahad, yeah.
So is riding their horse into the forest, and they come across a woman who was kind of hunched over, had lots and lots of like warts all over their face, kind of, had this kind of off-body center, like that.
Oh,
Right.
well,
Yeah.
I had a longer version, but we'll stick to the short version.
And she goes, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he said,
I'm here, sent by King Arthur to find out what it is all women want.
and she says, I can tell you, she's the one, I can tell you what all women want, but you'll have to marry me, right?
Yes.
You'll have to marry me,
Yeah.
once I tell you.
This is transactional. You give something to me, I'll give something to you.
Got it.
And so he said, he swallowed a bit, and his whole future flashed before his eyes about this idea of being married to this witch, or whatever, whichever word you want to use, which is politically correct right now. So we'll use that.
I'm just gonna
politically
let you
correct.
talk. I'm just gonna stay out of this. You go right ahead.
So anyway, he
So they
said,
get to say it, right?
okay,
All right. So,
whatever you want.
is this the way it goes? We have so many versions of this, but anyway, I'll say, what all women want is sovereignty. Now, sovereignty, a lot of times our students don't get the word sovereignty.
Especially the foreign students who are English as
to
second language.
translate. What is
Okay.
sovereignty? What does it mean to you? Do you have a sense of what it means? Do you have
Oh, it's being the master of your own domain.
Yes, exactly.
And we often say, to have choice,
Yeah.
to decide. So then what happens?
So he goes back to King Arthur, who he didn't have any other answer, and it seemed like the correct answer. He went to the knight in the designated spot. He told the knight, and it was a little like Rumpelstiltskin. It's like, you got it right, and he disappeared and was never seen again.
Oh, right, but Sir Galahad had to fulfill their promise.
So he goes back to the little hut where this person was living.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm here. It was the right answer, so I'm here to fulfill my end of the bargain.
So in that moment, she says, my lord, I can be like this during the day, but I can be like this in the evening. And then, it's like all long flowing hair.
She transformed into the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen.
Right. Or I can be this at night, and I can be like this during the day. And Sir Galahad says,
no, he didn't. No, before he got a chance to speak, she said, which is it going to be? Would you like to be like this at night for when we are together in bed, or like this when we're out with the people? What should it be?
What do you want?
And he took a moment, shuddered a bit, and said, this is not for me to decide. It's totally up to you. It's your choice. And at that moment, she transformed into this beautiful woman, and she was like that forever.
I actually have a variation on that. I think he says it's your choice, but we don't know what happens at the end. Because it's your choice.
Yeah, that's
so
good.
There's two versions, and you can take either one. Either you don't know the end, or my ending is the happily ever after version.
When Stephen first heard this story, earlier in that David Gordon metaphor workshop, I had made up some story, and he actually didn't like it. So it was interesting feedback that you could share a story. One person, it doesn't work for somebody, and then you share another story, and it obviously it's worked for over 36 years, or however long we've been together now. It was very impactful. It's a very impactful story for us. How do you feel about it?
Oh, I loved it. Every minute of it. It was on the edge of my seat, really. And because, it's hard to believe you guys didn't rehearse that, because it was just so,
Who's to say we didn't?
What we've rehearsed is the ability to agree and disagree within 30 seconds. Yeah.
We rarely train together. We did early on a bit, But you know, we in all of our trainings, either Rachel's teaching or I'm teaching, and
Huh.
often at the end of the training we'll come together and on the final day with the group.
Huh.
Sometimes it's the first time the group sees us together. So
Yeah, sometimes it's a joke at the end to say, okay, so there's really two different people, we're not the same person, obviously. But
Huh.
it's worked out logistically for us because time-wise, it wasn't efficient.
Right.
I could be seeing clients, Steve could be leading a training, he could be taking care of the kids, I could be doing a training.
Right.
We have sharing in all the different
yeah.
ways that we've been an NLP couple,
Right.
and continue to be. That's one of the things that I think is sort of an interesting experience for us. We just started in whatever Steve says, 1980, Stephen says 1980, and here we are 2022, close to 2023. And at least for me, my first story, I was in my mid-20s. You do the math. Where am I now?
Well, I know that 1980 was 42 years ago, going on 43 years ago. So, yeah.
Well,
I'll just,
there's one way we confirm. We never actually. It doesn't matter to me when I started. It was around that time, but I do know that I started in the fall of some year, and that spring, Richard Bandler and John Grinder and David Gordon and Robert Dilt all came to New York. So
really?
and Leslie Cannon Bandler. So they were all one at the time
Wow.
in the spring. By the fall, they'd all split up.
Oh,
So
really?
every year that was it, whether it was 79 or 80 or 81. Maybe someone watching this can call us and tell us when we met.
What I do know is that Leslie Cameron is now Leslie Cameron LeBeau, just to
Oh, yeah. She uses the boat now?
yeah, because she married Michael LeBeau.
Right, I know. But she bothers. She puts the Cameron in there anyway, so it's not just Leslie LeBeau.
I don't
I
know.
thought so. I thought it was Leslie Cameron. David would know.
You
Well,
know, if she really had sovereignty, she could just be Leslie Cameron. Leslie Cameron. She's just gonna need
she
that
could
guy.
have any name,
Yeah.
anything we choose.
You
Right?
know the story about Steve Andreas and Connie Ray, right?
I forget. Tell you.
Well, just that Steve took Connie Ray's name. His,
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
right,
we know
right,
that.
right, right. He had been Steve O, J.O.
John
Stevens,
John
John,
John Stevens.
John Stevens. Yeah,
I thought you were going to tell me how they met, right?
yeah, that's what I thought too.
Well, they were in a workshop together. No, I don't know. I don't know how they met, but
We'll have to bring Connie Ray back for an interview about
yeah.
that.
But it's interesting that the first book that you saw was Frogs and the Princess, Rachel, because I was talking to her about that. I was saying that basically, I think if it weren't for those two and all the books that they published and put together, I don't think NLP would be as big as it is today.
And the illustrator, whoever the illustrator was,
Yeah,
It looked like Peter Max, but I don't know. But
yeah.
I think that
and here's the version is coming
oh my
apart here.
goodness,
Oh
wow,
my.
it's been keep alive. Um, the structure of holding on.
Is that
I
a
think
is that a
that,
hardback book?
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow, I've never seen it in hardback. Wow, cool.
yeah, it may be out of print now.
Yeah.
Um,
And then this is a better version. This is structure too. So they all came out as hardbacks originally.
Huh.
but it's
I
interesting
think.
that you say that these two books brought, in that time period, 75 to in my period, which 81, was it that we as a populace read more
Mhm.
books, went to the bookstore because we surely didn't have anything like Amazon, the internet,
Right. Yeah.
and so got influenced that way. But now these books are not necessarily the influencer,
No, no,
right?
no.
I wonder what gets people. I know sometimes it's a podcast. Somebody will say, "Oh, I heard NLP."
Yeah.
We've had a lot of people say, my boss took some kind of NLP, and I really liked how they were
Mm-hmm.
interacting.
Mm-hmm.
On occasion, it's the opposite. My boss did NLP and I felt like I was being kind of played with, so I wanted to know what they were doing. So
Yeah.
I've gotten both of those. But I would say that, podcasts and YouTube probably.
Hmm. Yeah. I'd say so too. For me, I was a musician in New York City. I had no interest in, I mean, I needed psychotherapy, but I didn't want to be a psychotherapist, and I went to Tony Robbins' Firewalk experience because I was basically dragged to it by my now ex-girlfriend, who was interested in this thing, and she said, "You're coming." So it was kind of like the EST model, Steve. It was like if somebody goes to the seminar, then they are supposed to bring their friends and family next time. So it literally was based on that. It's where Tony did his marketing back then. So I was dragged to this thing and thought, okay, I'll get this over with. You know, she kind of looked like this a little bit. So I, I completed my obligations. But in fact, it turned out to be a really cool seminar. And Tony was teaching NLP. Everything he taught at that point was NLP, and he called it such. So the Firewalk is an introduction to NLP, like what you can do when you do NLP is you can even do crazy things like walking across hot burning coals. And so, yeah, the first book I ever read was Frogs into Princes. And it seemed like it was it's kind of de facto textbook of NLP at that point. But that was mid 80s. That was 85. And then
Tony Robbins did a good service for NLP. He's gone beyond, obviously, but
uh,
I think many people will go to Tony's seminars and say, I want more, or I
yeah,
want to be more grounded because I
that's
don't know what is
that's still
really
true.
going on.
Yeah, that's absolutely still true. Sid Jacobson teaches a thing for Tony Robbins people
Oh,
during
really?
yeah during Tony's events.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
That's very nice. I don't know Sid, but I've heard his name forever.
yeah. He's great. You'd like him. Yeah, he's been around as long as you guys have. As he started in he said as the second NLP training outside of like Santa Cruz. It was down in New Orleans in like 1970 something. You'd have to get the historians out, 77, 78, 79 maybe.
Yeah, I met him at some
There are a
conferences.
couple of historians out there. There's so many different NLP people. We're part of the leadership summit that has had met in person up until January 2020. I went to Alicante, Spain, and we all met. So all different NLP leaders who have training. Not everybody does training. Some people are doing research. There's a big move to have research, but to have different countries represented. So I've seen the more current, and now it's more online conversations that exist. So that's more the current NLP. We have the history. We have the
Yeah. So what do you guys think is the future of NLP? Tell me what you think. Where is it going? What's real in the NLP world?
You know,
Let me look at my crystal.
about 25 years ago, there was a panel. Annie Linden was on the panel. I was on the panel, and forget who else was there. But one of the questions they said 25 years ago is, "What is the future of NLP?" And I kind of remember what I said back then was I think that in the future NLP um, will be more common sense when we talk about, literally common sense that everyone will just have. This will be, I guess, intuitive because people will have learned this. And, I do think that it might just fade away. I still think that it may just be something that, 25 years later, people are doing NLP without calling it NLP. It's part
Sure.
of coaching. It's part of Weight Watchers. It's part of different organizations. People do it. Even Tony is not mentioning NLP. Um, uh, 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 So I do think that it might just dissipate. Um, and because there are so many people, I mean, the Leadership Summit is attempting to codify it and do research on it.
Bring it into academia. I think for me, you know, when I'm speaking to groups, because you think about, or I think about, you work with Shelley, and you know, the possibility of talking about sameness or difference with exception. And you know, I could say, oh, I've been doing the same thing since, you know, we started our training center in what, 84, 86, something like that. And what I often say to groups is, the material is the same. You know, of course, some techniques have been, you know, with variations. Of course, now doing more online training. Uh, but the people are completely different. Like, whatever the issues are, there's always communication issues. Like, we cannot get away from relationships with ourselves, with others. That exists in any century. And then we have these great tools. So I see the future to continue with these tools. You know, it's maybe a different way, because Stephen and I had not been online until we were pushed by COVID to be online. So that opened up a whole new area. Um, how people communicate, telehealth has really opened up for people. So we could have, you know, somebody from England and somebody from Marrakesh. You know, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
I still think there's a future of tools for anybody, because you can't say these issues go away. They may continue in a different way. People are talking about how people suffered now with COVID issues.
Right.
You know, the isolation, right?
Right.
That many teenagers. So I see it as an ongoing development. But my question, Doug, would be workshops. Whether people, you know, so I do one-on-one work. Stephen does one-on-one work. We do work with couples. We work with families. We also do training. That's where I wonder, you know, what's happened, because we often talk about in the 60s was so big with self-development groups, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, the early NLP trainers had hundreds of people coming, right? We don't have hundreds of people coming. Maybe Tony Robbins still has his.
No, he
And,
has
and, it,
thousands, thousands and multiple thousand. Yeah.
and as you said, you as a musician, you didn't come to be a trainer or a therapist. You came for the experience. You know, you were
Yeah.
He was dragged.
yeah, dragged. But you definitely had a personal experience, and a lot of people at the time were coming for personal experiences.
Yeah.
It's
It's true.
happening right now, and
Yeah.
yet one thing that's changed over time is that while people are coming for personal experiences, more and more students are coming and saying, "How can I make money with this?"
Mm.
You know, the times have changed. I read an article in the Times saying people are looking more not for looking for stability in work
Mm.
versus, you know, my, you know, so I think people are looking, how can I monetize NLP?
Yeah.
And they realize, you know, this is an amazing experience. And, you know, yes, you can make money if you're skilled and know and have tools of transformation that could be that can empower other people. But you know, we also know that people are learning NLP, think, oh, it's manipulative. How can I get what I want with NLP? So I
Yeah.
do think what people are looking for is much more varied than it was initially.
Yeah.
Initially, there were a lot of therapists who weren't looking to make more money. They were looking to be better at what they did. A lot of Gestalt therapists came to NLP. It was the next level, the next thing.
Yeah.
So that has changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that the future is unclear in the world of coaching. You know, we teach mainly in New York. Like I said, we have an international audience, but mainly our work, we don't go internationally.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I mean, even that.
Well, actually, like a couple of months before COVID, I was uh, in China teaching a training there of at least 100 people in the
Okay,
training program.
so
So we were doing that until
yeah, okay,
the
so
world
I
changed.
see myself more as a New York-based trainer. And what I also see as a trend is the world of coaching.
Hmm.
And so we'll get a lot of people who we say, yes, we're giving you a coach certification. But I can see the trending in the world of corporate, like, let's say mindfulness now is a well-developed mainstream word. Coaching is a well-developed mainstream word. NLP, still kind of on the edge a little bit,
Hmm.
Any good coach will come and study with us. Like they
Yeah,
know, they talk to other people. And an NLP person who studies with us sometimes feels that they have to go to coaching only to play the game, or they ask me about academics. They're still
hmm,
asking, like, well, how would I get, a license? And, right,
right.
still, so there's
Because
still,
both of you guys are licensed, right? You both are psychotherapists
yes,
officially.
Well,
yeah.
Rachel's a clinical psychologist.
Yeah, I actually went back to school. I had that early dance movement therapy,
Hmm.
did my NLP for a while, but I was teaching a course at American Management Association about goal setting. And
Hmm.
I always had a PhD as a goal. And I started to feel out of integrity with the executives who I was teaching. I was encouraging them to achieve professional excellence, it was called. So I gave myself that challenge at around 40 years old that I would have a PhD, and I already, had some a master's already, so it wasn't the 10-year.
Hmm.
Yeah, that I think Stephen Gilligan basically said something to me like, "Oh, now you're playing with the big guys."
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but we do get that comment a lot of times of stability, but will NLP give you the stability? And I don't know, Doug, if you've experienced this with your students, but in addition to all these skills, you have to know how to be a business person.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my podcast, as you know, because you've both been on it, is called the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. But it's about both the skills to be a great coach, but also the skills that you need to be a coach in business. How do you make money? How do you make a living as a practitioner? And that is, of course, the challenge for all of us, for anybody, whether you're an NLP person or a hairdresser or whatever. You are not just the technician, you're also the business person who has to get customers in the door, have to pay the bills, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so yeah, it's an age-old issue. You've got to wear multiple hats. I mean, even as a therapist, you have to do that. You still have to get clients as a
For a while,
LCSW or
I
whatever.
never thought of myself as a business person, and I thought, wait, that's not true. We manage questions and calls, we
Sure.
service. It's a different product.
Yeah.
It's not a I don't know, we're not selling, a remote, but for sure, the awareness of rapport,
Yeah.
you know, to essentials.
Yeah, for sure. So I find it very interesting that the history of NLP, if you will, that it started from Bandler and Grinder, who were not therapists, modeling therapists like Fritz Perls first and Virginia Satir, and they sort of became, in a way, better at doing that than many of the people who had studied to be practitioners. They just didn't quite get what Bandler and Grinder got. And so then when Bandler and Grinder started teaching seminars in Gestalt therapy, therapists would come to it and learn more. It was really kind of cool. And then of course they met Milton Erickson and they said, okay, that's enough. We'll just focus on this guy now. But
What I
much of
what I understood was that they actually never met Fritz Perls, is one of the stories I heard, that they only listened to reel, that the audio tapes. But that's a story. I don't know where I heard that one.
it's certainly possible, but I have heard stories about how Richard would, talk like him and walk like him and do things like that. So maybe I don't
Mhm.
know. I'm not sure. That's a good question.
I think the best part about modeling Fritz Perls is really identifying parts really identifying, recognizing these different parts and being able to step into each one.
Right.
I think that was, I know you did a lot of Gestalt training. What would you say is the value of Gestalt from incorporated into NLP?
I do think that the idea of parts is NLP wouldn't be NLP without this idea of intrapersonal communication
Yeah, yeah,
and parts work and reframing of
sure.
parts. It's sort of a core idea. I
Let
don't
me
know.
just let me just ask you about modeling though, because it's interesting when Bandler and Grinder modeled people back in the old days. They did kind of sort of just go into it. I mean, there's the famous story about Bandler and Grinder doing a double induction for Stephen Gilligan to do deep trance identification with Milton Erickson, and when he came out of the trance, he was sort of confined to a wheelchair and talking like Erickson and moving like Erickson and having that kind of weird inability to really use his mouth because Erickson had polio left over. And so, and then, Bandler walking around and talking like Fritz Perls with that Austrian accent, as if that was an important feature. So modeling was never really taught. It was often talked about, but nobody really taught modeling until, from my experience at least, David Gordon came along and did that modeling thing. And I took the workshop you guys put on with David at your place in New York City. It's a 12-day workshop, if I recall correctly. But that was where I really started to understand what modeling was all about.
Mhm.
Would you
I think,
agree with that?
yeah, I mean, I think that what I understand from the early days, because it's really my interpretation, right, is that they were starting with behavior first. And one of the things about Stephen Gilligan is he knew Milton Erickson so well that he could also go into what David Gordon was working with what was so important, and the criteria and the emotional states. But I think that overall, it's learning how to ask questions to the exemplar, and it just got better and better, over the years. I think with all the different contributions. I just when I like using Robert Dilts's model of the logical levels
Mm-hmm.
for our students for modeling.
For
So
modeling, yeah. Tell me about that. How does that work for modeling?
I ask the students in the master practitioner to go out and find somebody who has an attribute that they like. So, for example, somebody who's really disciplined about exercising.
Okay.
So asking them and then inviting them to step into the experience, right? So they're associating it and then going through what's the context, what are your behaviors, what are your capabilities, what are your values and beliefs, who are you, and what's your greater than, purpose, and stepping into that, and then having our students become that in their own way,
Mm-hmm.
and we interview them. So I said, so what's it like, but let's say you were modeling somebody. I say, what do you think Doug could do better about exercising? So we're learning from the model. And then the last question is, what's a gift that you want to give to Doug? And then from that, we bring it back to you and we offer you this gift. So I kind of, have a variety of things. One is that you have to go find somebody. So in my early days of training, I would say, just pick a model. So somebody might do Mother Teresa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which we all know. We read nowadays. We can watch documentaries. It's one way of modeling, but I think the questioning is the way to go. And then subtly I remind them about some of David's questions. I don't use that as much as I do the logical levels.
Fascinating. So you don't use the experiential array of David Gordon's thing. You mostly stick to the.
Kind of throw it in little pieces.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, also, thinking about the meta model, it is about modeling. It's the meta model. It's modeling It's how the person's map of the world with their
Mhm.
distortions, deletions, and generalizations. How do you do what you do? It's not asking any why questions, it's the what and the how. And over the years, in addition to having Fritz Perls as model and Virginia Satir and Milton Erickson um, and Robert Dilts as model Bandler and sleight of mouth patterns,
Mhm.
we have a lot of models. So when I'm doing coaching and counseling, all of that is part of my model. There are many different models I can step into when I can do something might be more Gestalt or more hypnotic or more couples work. And ultimately, before I know what model I'm going to use with someone, because people say, come say, oh, I want hypnosis. Well, let's see what is needed here. And I always start out by modeling my clients and learning about, finding about what their model is, what
Hmm.
they're dealing with, and learning from them and modeling their experience, um, their beliefs, their patterns. And then from that, I can assess what therapeutic model would be appropriate for them.
Right.
So
Got it.
it's always modeling, it's always being curious, always being in that state of wonder. Tell me more about how you do what you do.
Right.
What have you been doing with modeling?
Thank you. Thank you for asking me that, Rachel. Um, well,
Catch you later.
And how do you do it?
well, again, thank you for asking me that, Stephen. I do a lot of asking those kinds of questions. You're absolutely right, Steve, that the meta model is about, you know, eliciting from the person what is their map of the world. How do they do what they do? And if what they do is like, I have a phobic reaction to cats, it's like, well, that's interesting. How do you do that? And then we can, in a sense, get the structure of that experience that creates that subjective experience for them. And then we can, if we want to, take it on for ourselves so we can also become phobic of cats. Or we can say, let's perturb that system and change it in some way that makes it not function so they no longer have the phobia of cats. And then maybe we can actually model somebody who has a fascination for cats and say, how do they do that? And, take on that structure. So not only do I not have a phobia of cats, but I'm fascinated by them little critters. So you can do that too. I think that's one of the beautiful things about NLP, is it really, once you've discerned that model, whatever it might be, you can do that. You can take it on for yourself and become a better gardener or better. Actually, the thing I wanted, Steve, when I first started NLP is I wanted to be a better piano player. I know I wanted to use NLP to get better at what I was doing at the time. So literally there were two things I wanted to get better at in this NLP seminar that I was going to take was piano playing and marathon running. I wanted to be better at that. And gosh darn it, I did. It took a few years, but
You're playing the piano at the same time. Amazing.
yeah, that was the hard part, is getting the
I
piano
like to,
going.
It's like you had the time, but how did you use that time? And you use that time based upon what you've learned.
Yeah.
The one thing I mentioned being a math major, and people say math and psychology, how did you go from one field to the other? And yet, when I was learning mathematics, people didn't say, the teachers, I had wonderful teachers who didn't say, oh, that's the right answer, that's the wrong answer, 0 points or 10 points. They basically said, how did you do that?
Huh.
How did you come up with the answer? They weren't interested in their, I actually, some of my teachers gave me a lot of credit for the wrong answer.
Huh.
Because it wasn't about where you got to, it was like, well, how did you get there? And then
Wow.
what? And then what
In math,
happened?
that's amazing. That's really cool. That's really cool.
So for me, that's how I taught my students the math class. Just curious, how did you get from A to B? And
Wow.
oh, so you went from A to B, and then when I asked them the question, how did you? They realize, oh, that didn't make sense. And I said, well, how else could you have done it? and they began to learn with questions about, oh, I can do it another way.
That's so cool.
That's logical. So in a way, for me, what attracted me to NLP was the structure that
Yeah,
each person has. It's a study of the structure of subjective experience, which
exactly.
is perfect because it was about the model. One's a math model and one's a individual model of the
Yeah.
world.
Oh, wow. That's great. I wish I had had a math teacher like you. Wow, that's fantastic. I was talking to Robert Dilts yesterday, and he said that his first major when he got to US Santa Cruz was art. He was an art major. And then the second semester he switched his major to physics and calculus. And I'm going like, Robert, you don't have to make up words. It's okay.
You know, he did something at a workshop once where he put a formula, Robert Dills put a formula on the board and he asked everybody our physical reaction, but then he switched it, I don't know what he did. He made it colorful or he said, add other words to it, and it was,
Uh,
no having the association, because there is unfortunately for some of us, the association, I never really did well in, geometry
yeah,
or whatever.
yeah.
I just want to tag on for modeling that Rob Schwartz, who
Hmm.
um, really has a passion for modeling, and so that has ongoingly been an inspiration to hear when he meets one of our students and he's leading a class. He goes, "Oh, I have to go model that person." He's always intrigued, and he keeps, I'd say, the experiential array from David Gordon very much in his work.
Yeah,
Um, and on a total tangent,
yeah,
just talking about NLP and
yeah.
tools, this is really a tangent, just going somewhere else.
Well, it's mathematics, tangents,
Oh,
right?
okay. As long as I'm using the language.
You can also do a secant
We've
and
been watching a Korean series. It's called It's Okay to Not Be Okay. And
Huh.
it's not that this is I'm promoting. What I'm promoting is the use of submodalities. We talk a lot about interpersonal communication and then this idea of how do we communicate internally. And I don't speak Korean, so I read the subtitles. But what I discovered is throughout the day, I started to hear Korean in my head.
Huh.
I realized it was covering up any internal chatter.
Huh.
So I started to have some internal chatter, and then I said,
seems real.
I just said, I'm turning it to Korean. And it went away. So I just thought
Mm.
I have to remind myself sometimes these submodality tools I forget to use, and then just that
That's a good
moment.
one. It's change your internal dialogue to another language you don't
Yeah,
understand.
yeah, just so.
Yeah, that's great. So what did I say? I have no idea. I don't speak that language. But yeah, that's brilliant. And it's also interesting that in neither model of modeling um, are submodalities brought up. I mean, the experiential array doesn't talk about submodalities. The logical levels doesn't talk about submodalities, but that that could be a really key thing.
Interesting experience.
And yet,
Yeah.
of course, with the meta model, when you chunk down and you chunk down from unspecified to specified, you will get visual, auditory, kinesthetic. So how do you think about that? Well, I visualize it, but then how do you visualize it?
Hmm.
So you are ultimately looking for how do you experience your experience, which is
Right.
somewhat, it's interesting when Rachel said the show was about submodalities. It may,
No, for me in turn.
I know,
Yeah.
but I was thinking she meant there were certain scenes that they slow down
Oh,
the emotion, and
the camera work.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting to see this time stretched out, and also it could be just someone looking at the camera, and it's a slow down with facial expressions. And I had just seen Charlie Chaplin, The Great Dictator, last week, and how they sped it up. They use scenes where he's moving around that it's not in regular time.
Hmm.
So it's something like that. It's deep. It's like one submodality shift, to slow down or to speed up, is what made the scene the scene. It's not the content. So I think sometimes with all the complexities of NLP techniques, sometimes we do forget, people do forget the simple submodality shift
Yeah.
of making things lighter, of making things still,
Yeah.
of moving locations. I do think that that piece that Richard Bandler developed is sometimes you don't need to do anything else other than make a submodality shift and see if it sticks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That's yeah.
I was just thinking about you and the piano, it's such a important part of you and seeing behind you to know you can play something fast, slow, right? Loud, soft. And there would be some different experience.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't have you explored that with your own playing?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, when I was thinking about piano playing, I got into doing hypnosis. My first experience with hypnosis was because I had a fear of performance, performance anxiety. So like 1980 or so, I went to a place in Colombia. This woman was doing a study about piano players with performance anxiety. And she taught us how to do self-hypnosis so that we wouldn't have that anymore. And it was really fascinating to me because part of what I'm realizing now because of this discussion, part of what happened is that I changed the pictures that I was making in my brain when I was playing, so that when I was sitting up there about to perform, and what was in my head was a picture of all the audience members in really big and clear and bright, and it's like, well, I was scared because I was focused on that. But if I took that picture and shrunk it down and moved it over there and made it black and white and then just focused on the piano, I was okay because it was just me and the music, and I liked that.
I was thinking just yesterday actually about performance anxiety and how there's so many ways in which we could things to focus on or defocus on
Yeah,
or
defocus on. Yeah,
right. And what often happens is of all the infinite possibilities, our mind gets into one and it's, oh my God, like, I'm getting anxiety. I want to stop thinking about that. And then all you do is thinking about that and you don't see, oh, I can do that.
right.
But I also do this. It's like if you're doing a presentation and sometimes if you go meditate yourself, and now you're hearing yourself speak. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be hearing yourself speaking as you're speaking, but you can. It's not very useful. And to be able to say, oh yeah, that's one thing I can do. I can do that. I have the ability to go meta, but I also have the ability to come back and focus on one person
Right.
and speak to that person. So we have this, that's what I like about NLP. We have the ability to do this. We have
Yeah.
the ability to worry. How do you do it? We have the ability to become anxious. How do we do that? How are we able to do it? How else can you do it? What's another way you can worry? And so I do think the idea of modeling is learning how people do it so they can do something different.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the fun for me with listening to Stephen, but maybe with the typical
You
style,
have fun listening to me?
well, is seeing
How's it fun?
seeing the opposite or seeing another way, or that idea. And I was just thinking that we do often focus on the worry or the anxiety. The other focus with resources, right, is what do you do well? Where are you when you're super confident, or where, oh, I don't have any performance anxiety when I go grocery shopping, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
and reminding ourselves. I do this a lot with working with pain, is paying attention to what part of your body feels good, because the attention is so much on what doesn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, some of that came influence from Milton Erickson. We have all the resources we need. A little bit of it came from Richard Bandler questioning, why don't we experience joy? you know, where, what is that about, you know?
Right.
And then just learning more and more about that we pay attention, how to pay attention to everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I was having fun thinking how I would change it a little bit, improve it a little bit, my way.
Yeah, and also it's the both and aspect that Stephen Gilligan brought, at least to my attention. I don't know if he was the originator of it. He credits Erickson, although I never remember Erickson ever saying it exactly. But certainly the idea of having both at the same time is really important to me, because I can listen, be meta, and listen to what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, and at the same time be communicating and focusing on the person that I'm speaking to. And it's kind of coming from music, you know, it's like I'm playing the note, but I'm also hearing how it's happening in context, how it's landing out there, how it's in the context of the piece itself. So then how does the melody stand out in the chord structure, you know, kind of thing. I'm meta, but I'm also doing it at the same time.
For me also, and I did get a lot of that from Stephen Gilligan as well, which informs almost all the work I do as well, because it's one way of knowing, are you operating linearly, consciously, or the unconscious, where the unconscious two things can be exist at the same time. The conscious mind is the rational mind.
Right.
Which is come back to mathematics, because rational comes from the word ratio, which is a comparison of two numbers.
Oh my goodness gracious. Seriously? That just blew my mind. Really? That's amazing. Say that again. Rational comes out of a ratio, which is a comparison of two numbers.
Yes, it's a comparison.
Wow.
So to be rational is to compare
Wow.
one to the other. So whenever we're comparing, we're in our rational mind.
That's great.
Whereas when we're not comparing, when we're holding two things simultaneously,
Like either or.
well, it's not either or. It's do I do this or do I this? Is it for me or for the other person, and myself or my other? But there's two people with two criteria, two needs. Holding them is not comparing them. It's not saying one over the other,
Yeah.
dominant, submissive. It's just holding it. So that's not rational.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I have nothing I could improve on that.
No, that's good.
I think it's a good closer, Steve.
That's
I think so too.
how can I improve upon this? Oh, you went into trance.
I'm going to work on that formula. I'm just sitting with the ratio. The only thing I could say that I like about that is knowing where words come from. And I like corporation because it's corporeal and it means the body. So I always like to think about incorporating and taking into the body. So that's the only thing I can offer you as another word that had no meaning. But when it comes to math, you are
That's cool.
the master.
I'm not going to bring up irrational numbers.
Thank you. We didn't raise irrational
or even imaginary numbers.
Oh,
you know, that's that goes beyond.
Yeah, that's where I stop right there. So,
all right, so
stop right there.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, hey, thank you. And let's so I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm interrupting.
I was just going to thank anybody who's listening, who's contributing to Marilou and Jerry to recovery.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much for that. So thank you for being here, and let's hope that this does some good for people, and not just interesting, but also that they can find it in their hearts to contribute to Marilou and Jerry, because gosh knows we could be there and need the same thing sometime tomorrow for all we know.
Yeah. And it can happen in a moment.
Yeah, exactly.
The gratitude moment, you know.
Yeah, indeed.
That's what we do.
And to remember to live today.
Live for today. And as if you could live for 1,000 years. And isn't it nice to know that you can enjoy both at the same time? See you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. you. Bye.
Thanks for doing this, Doug.
This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.